This happened back in 2016 when I was in 5th grade. Back then, there was this trend of killer clowns being spotted all across the US, although our town was really quiet and nothing like that had ever happened here before. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in Mrs. Riker's class. We were doing this whole group project thing where we had to work together to make these dioramas for an upcoming book fair. I remember it was about 1:00 in the afternoon. I was sitting at the table with my two best friends, Chris and Michael. Suddenly, Chris stopped what he was doing and started looking out the window. "What's up?" I asked him. He didn't answer me right away. He just kept staring out the window. I followed his gaze and saw something that made me feel a bit uneasy. There was a man in a dirty red and yellow clown suit standing right outside our classroom window. He had white face paint on, but it was smudged and cracking in some places. His smile was painted on in black, and it kind of looked like a skull. And then there was this black stuff around his eyes. It kind of looked like bruises. I don't remember if he had a nose or anything else. All I remember is his eyes, which were completely black and soulless. He just stood there silently staring in at us while we were working on our project. It was really creepy and unsettling. I turned to Mrs. Riker and whispered, Mrs. Riker, there's a clown outside and he's staring at us." She didn't say anything. She just took a look outside. Then she said in a calm voice, "Well, thank you for letting me know." Then she went back to whatever she was doing. Me and my friends were kind of scared at this point, so we just kept watching the clown. He just stood there silently waving at us, but not in a friendly way. More like a silent but deadly type of way. So I decided to do something. I got up out of my seat and went to the window. I stuck my head out and yelled at him, "Get away from here, you stupid clown!" He didn't respond. He just continued staring at me with those soulless eyes of his and continued waving. Mrs. Riker must have thought I was in danger because she got up from her desk and came over to me. "Let's just call the front office," she said into the classroom phone. Then she hung up and told us to go back to our seats. She also told us to stay quiet and not look out the window. But of course, we didn't listen to her. Me and my friends were sitting at the table, but we couldn't stop looking out the window. Within seconds, the principal came over the loudspeaker and said in a very serious tone, "Attention all students and staff. This is a lockdown drill. Please follow your teacher's instructions." I was confused. Usually when we had lockdown drills, they would tell us to get under our desks and put our heads down so that we wouldn't be visible from the windows. But Mrs. Riker did something different. She told us to put our heads down and stay quiet. Then she locked the door and drew the blinds. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why did she close the blinds? She knew that guy was outside. I tried my best to hold back my tears. I was scared. Why did we have to hide? Was that clown gonna come inside the classroom and attack us? Was he gonna stab us or eat us or something? I honestly don't know. My mind was just running wild with thoughts. Time seemed to pass very slowly. I don't know how long we were hiding there for. I think it was about 30 minutes. I could hear people running around outside the classroom, but I couldn't see anything because it was dark in the room. I don't remember if I was crying or not. I think I was. I remember Mrs. Riker comforting me and telling me everything was going to be okay. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Suddenly, the principal came back over the loudspeaker and said, "All clear. The coast is clear. You may return to your regular activities." As soon as Mrs. Riker unlocked the door, I ran to the window and looked outside. The clown was gone. Relief washed over me. I was so happy that he was gone. But then I realized something. If the clown was gone, Then why did he make us hide in the first place? Did he want to scare us? Or was he trying to break into the classroom and attack us? Was he waiting until the coast was clear so he could come back and get us when we weren't paying attention? After school that day, me and Chris walked home together. On the way, we passed by these woods behind the school. We didn't pay much attention to them at first, but then we heard two girls running past us. They were out of breath, and they were saying something about a clown. "There's a clown in the woods! There's a clown in the woods!" they panted as they ran away. Chris and I looked at each other. Should we check it out? I think we both wanted to say yes, but neither of us said anything. Instead, we just kept walking. Then suddenly, Chris stopped in his tracks. He pointed to a figure that was standing behind some trees. It was the same clown from earlier, except now he was partially hidden by the trees. He was waving at the girls who had just passed by. He was moving very slowly, like in slow motion. It was like he was taking his sweet time to watch them leave. Me and Chris started running as fast as we could towards the road. I don't know if the clown was planning on following us or not, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. When I got home, I told my parents about it. Of course, they were very worried. They called the school to ask what had happened, but all they got was a vague answer. Later that night, I heard over the news that the police had been called again, and that they had patrolled the area where the clown had been seen. But they didn't find anyone. No one knows who that clown was or what he was doing there, and I'm pretty sure nobody will ever know. As a kid, I used to think that clowns were funny, but after seeing that, I haven't smiled around clowns ever since. Honestly, though, I don't even know if that clown was actually a clown. I mean, maybe it was some guy wearing a clown costume or something. But then, why would he have been at the school in the first place? And why did he come back after the lockdown? What did he want? To this day, I do not know if that clown was just trying to scare us, or if he was trying to kidnap us, or hurt us. All I know is that when I was hiding under that desk, I was genuinely scared. I remember thinking to myself, this is it. This is how I die. Now, I'm not saying that there is actually a killer clown loose in my town or anything like that. Maybe it was just some stupid prank or something. But what bothers me the most is that he came back after the lockdown and watched us leave. Why did he do that? I was a freshman in high school. I'm now 21. I went to a public school in a relatively nice suburban town. We had our share of problems, but we weren't prepared for this. Back then, lockdown drills were commonplace. It must have happened every other month or so. You get used to the whole thing. As the bell rang to start fourth period, I was sitting in Earth Science class chatting with my lab partner about how the weekend was. Mrs. Chen, our teacher, was writing something on the board. She paused and listened to the loudspeaker crackle to life. She turned to us and mouthed the words, "Pop quiz." She got a piece of paper and wrote down a question about sedimentary rocks. I answered honestly and passed the paper back to her. As she was grading, the intercom announced, "This is a lockdown. Lock all doors, lights off, stay quiet." My initial thought was, great, here we go again. Mrs. Chen, without hesitation, locked the door, pulled the blinds, turned off the overhead light and the desk lamp, and sat down at her computer. She waited a few seconds, then began pacing near the whiteboard. A second announcement came over the intercom a minute later. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." In hindsight, the urgency in the voice was unmistakable. But at the time, I only thought, oh wow, this better not be another false alarm. The sound of police sirens could be heard faintly in the distance. Mrs. Chen's face was pale, and she kept glancing at the door and checking her phone. Her behavior fueled my anxiety, turning what should have been a mundane lockdown into something much more frightening. We stood by the door, listening intently as slow footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The footsteps stopped directly outside our classroom door. Then someone knocked 3 times in succession, lightly at first, like someone testing the door to see if it was propped open. We were frozen in fear as the doorknob slowly turned, then stopped. I looked around the room at everyone else. Their faces reflected my own terror. A male voice outside the door said, "This is just a drill. You can open the door now." Mrs. Chen shook her head, signaling for us to stay quiet. The man continued to turn the doorknob again and again, knocking lightly against the door. "This is just a drill," he said again. "You can open the door." Each time he tried to open the door, his knocks became slightly more aggressive. As if frustrated that it was no use, he finally stopped. After a few minutes, the only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Relief washed over me. I knew nothing could ever justify such a terrible intrusion, but at least it was over. My breathing calmed, but it soon became uneven and shallow. I was hyperventilating. I tried to make myself breathe normally, but it was difficult. Then suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed down the hallway, the sound of a girl's voice. I looked around the room. Many students were now crying softly. One student, visibly shaken, whispered, "I saw a shadow pass the door window a few times. It was tall and thin." Mrs. Chen remained calm. She told us to stay quiet and listen. Footsteps returned to the hallway, louder and quicker than before. Voices echoed closer, becoming more distinct. Several officers shouted down the hallway, "Everybody stay in place. Do not move. Keep your heads down." The voices approached our classroom door. One of the officers knocked loudly and firmly. "Police!" Another officer rattled the doorknob. "Open up." Mrs. Chen unlocked the door and the officers entered. "Is anyone hurt?" an officer asked. No one responded. Mrs. Chen stepped forward and said, "We were on lockdown. The kids are fine." The officer nodded, showing his badge. "Can I ask what room this is?" "Earth Science, room 247. "Thank you." He turned to the class and said, "Listen closely. You're going to remain seated and put your hands where I can see them." One by one, the officers led us out of the classroom, keeping us in a tight line. We walked past other rooms, hearing similar activity, voices and shuffling feet. Outside, the scene was chaotic. Numerous police cars were parked in the lot, along with an unmarked van with a SWAT logo on the side. Students were lined up on the football field facing the school. I spotted a man being led by 2 officers toward the waiting police van. He was pale, about 30 years old, with long flowing hair and dark clothing. He shuffled rather than walked. His eyes were blank, staring off into space. A police officer approached us. "Is anyone missing their Chromebook?" I remember thinking, how oblivious. He explained, "If you're missing your Chromebook, please let us know. We might have confiscated it from the intruder." Now, that was a scary thought. I remember a swarm of news vans arriving, their lights flashing, making the situation feel straight out of a movie. Over the next hour, rumors spread among the students. I heard the intruder was an axe murderer, that he stabbed someone, that he brought explosives. When my parents arrived, I remember feeling both relieved and disappointed that it wasn't a real axe murderer. The principal made an announcement over the intercom. "Good afternoon, Wildcat families. This is an emergency code brown lockdown drill. Please be advised there was a code violation on campus. School officials and local law enforcement handled the situation. No one was hurt. Everything is under control." That was the last we ever heard about the incident. But there were things that still haunt me. The soft knock at the door, the turning doorknob, the scream down the hallway. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder several years ago, and I think that event contributed to it. In reality, it was a mental health crisis, a troubled man who somehow slipped through security. When I was younger, I had a hard time separating fiction from reality, especially with scary stories. I remember hiding under my bedsheets at night, listening intently, imagining every creak and whisper to be a sign of danger approaching my bedroom door. The event at school heightened my awareness of danger, which has stayed with me into adulthood. My brain is wired to always be searching for threats, whether it be a sudden noise, a stranger in a crowd, or an unexpected touch. These triggers send me into a panic, bringing back the fear and uncertainty I felt that day. In retrospect, I can recognize the irrationality of my fear. I understand that a man with a history of mental illness entering a classroom doesn't mean he was carrying an axe or planning to stab someone. Yet, my mind conjures up these images anyway. It's as if the unknown is scarier than knowing the truth. Over the years, I've learned to manage my anxiety through therapy and medication, but the experience left an indelible mark on me. Even today, the mere mention of lockdowns or school shootings sends shivers down my spine. And when I hear about intruders on school property, my heart races. I can still vividly recall the events of that day, the piercing scream, the heavy footsteps, and the chilling words, "This is just a drill." While it may have been a long time since I walked the halls of my high school, the echoes of that day continue to resonate within me, serving as a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the enduring impact of trauma. There was this kid in my high school named Luke. I don't remember what his first name was, but we'll be calling him Luke. Luke was in my grade, but I only ever had one class with him because he was homeschooled most of the time. We'll get into that later. Anyway, the only class I shared with him was an elective computer class. This class was really cool. You could come in whenever you wanted and leave whenever you wanted as long as you got your work done. And it was just a bunch of random computers and electronics equipment laying around for you to play with. It was nice because it was a class full of people from different grades, so it was a good place to meet new people and make friends. I think I was maybe one of the youngest people in the class. I was either a sophomore or junior, while most of the students were seniors. This will become relevant later. Now, back to Luke. Luke was definitely weird. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He was completely emotionless and kept to himself. Even when people tried talking to him, he would just give them a quick glance and then go back to whatever he was doing. Now, to clarify, he wasn't creepy or anything like that. He wasn't strange or mean or anything like that. He was just completely emotionless. He was like a robot. So anyway, there was this group of seniors who sat together at the front of the class, and they knew everyone who entered the room was watching them. So when Luke would walk in, they would all turn their heads, stare at him, and burst out laughing. Then they would start making fun of him for being so quiet and for not talking. But that wasn't even the worst part. Oh no. One day, I was working on a project at the back of the room, and I heard commotion coming from the front of the classroom. I turned around and saw the same group of kids surrounding Luke. They were all standing up now, and they were taunting him to say something. And when he didn't, one of the guys took a crumpled-up piece of paper and threw it straight at the top of his head. He slowly looked up at the guy, and then back down at his computer screen without saying a word. I felt bad for him, so I decided to go over and say hi. "Hey, how's it going?" I asked. He quickly looked up at me and responded in a soft voice. "I'm fine," he said. I don't know why, but that caught me off guard. I was expecting him to ignore me, but he actually responded. I awkwardly smiled and went back to what I was doing. This happened every day. As soon as he walked in the door, these guys would jump him and make fun of him until he left. I remember thinking to myself that it was really messed up what these guys were doing, but at the same time, I couldn't help but feel bad for them too. Because even though they were jerks and they picked on this poor kid every day, it seemed like they had nothing better to do. They were probably bored. I don't know. I have no excuse for them, but that's how I saw it at the time. So one day, I saw Luke sitting alone outside on the grass after school. I didn't think much of it. I just figured he was waiting for his ride. But day after day, I started noticing him sitting there. Sometimes he would stay out there for hours. It made me sad. So one day I decided to ask him if he wanted a ride home. "You want to drive yourself home? You sure you can drive?" Yeah, thanks," he replied. So I went over, opened the passenger side door, and he got in. The whole car ride was silent, but it was a nice silence, like we were both comfortable with it. Once we got to his house, he thanked me again, and he started getting out of the car. But I stopped him. "Wait, do you live by yourself?" "Yeah," he responded hesitantly. "Do you want me to come inside for a bit? We could watch TV or something." "Oh, no, it's fine. Thanks, but I, gotta go inside," he said. As soon as he got inside his house, he shut the door and turned off all the lights. So I couldn't see in, but I could see the curtains move as he looked out. I waited a few seconds. Then I drove home. The next day, I saw him sitting outside again. I gave him a quick wave, but he didn't respond. He just stared ahead blankly. The day after that, I approached him and asked him if he wanted a ride home again. He accepted, and we got in the car. On the way, I asked him, "Hey, do you want to hang out sometime? Like go to the movies or something?" He replied, Sure." So I said, "Great. How about tomorrow? I'll pick you up at 4 by." He responded, "Okay." And that's all he said. For the rest of the year, we were pretty good friends. Every day at school we would acknowledge each other, but that was about it. We didn't really talk much during the day. Well, one day he didn't show up to school. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just sick or something. But later that day, we heard an announcement over the intercom that we were going into lockdown. Students were told to stay in their classrooms and to lock the doors. When I got to my classroom, I saw the teacher holding her phone in her hand, and she was looking at it with a worried expression. She told us to stay in the classroom while she went to investigate what was going on. We all knew something must have happened because the lockdown lasted for hours. Eventually, we were given the all clear, and our parents started showing up to pick us up. And then I saw Luke's parents. They looked worried. They asked me if I had seen Luke, but I said no. That night, I heard a loud bang on my bedroom window. I looked out and saw Luke standing there with a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Luke, what are you doing?" I asked. I need your help," he whispered. "What? What's going on? Why are you here?" I need to hide," he said. "Why? What happened?" "I'm sorry," he said. "I tried to do something bad tonight." "I'm sorry," he continued. "Why are you doing this? What are you planning on doing?" He looked down at his feet and whispered, "I don't know anymore." I screamed, "Dad, come here!" And I ran to the other side of my bed. My dad came running in and asked what was going on. When he saw Luke, he screamed, "Get away from my son!" And Luke ran off. My parents called the police and gave them Luke's name and what he had said. Apparently, the police went to his house, but he wasn't there. I don't know what they said to his parents, but they were crying. Later that night, they found him in the woods behind our neighborhood and brought him back home. The police questioned him, and he confessed everything. Apparently, he had snuck into the school earlier that day and hid in the boiler room. He was planning on doing something bad, but I don't know what. The police charged him with making a terroristic threat and sent him to juvie. I don't know what happened to him after that. I assume he got help, though. I just hope he got the help he needed. So, yeah, that's the story. I guess the reason I posted this is because I often think back to that situation and wonder how things could have turned out differently. Like, what if the police hadn't found him that night? Or what if he had actually hurt someone? Or what if I hadn't been the one to find him sitting by himself and decide to befriend him? Things could have ended very differently, which is crazy to think about. I woke up early on this morning. I was excited because it was my first day back at school. I wasn't expecting what was going to happen. I still have nightmares about it. Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I will be reading from a horror story subreddit. This story comes from a 15-year-old user. Let's jump into it. The year was 2017, and I was a sophomore at Northside High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. My freshman year had been all right, and now that summer had passed, I was ready for a fresh start. The day before this happened, we had a lockdown drill. It was pretty realistic. The teachers brought us into the hallways and made us hide in the back corner. I remember wondering how the police would find me if they ever needed to. That's why when I walked into my first period class the next morning, I was a little surprised to see some of my classmates already hiding in the closet in the back of the room. Our teacher, Mrs. Mills, turned the lights off and told us to stay quiet. As the minutes ticked by and more students snuck into the closet, I became worried. I took out my phone and began texting my friend Alex. She didn't respond. I decided to go into the closet. When I got in there, I saw over 20 students and teachers standing in a group. "What's going on?" I whispered. No one answered. Suddenly, the fire alarm blared through the halls. We could hear police sirens wailing outside the windows. At this point, I realized that this wasn't a drill. We were being attacked. I couldn't help but think that I was being hunted. I was trapped in a game of cat and mouse. Only the cat was real, and I had no idea where it was. I'm sorry for the interruption, but at this point, I have to ask you to please hit that like button if you are enjoying this story. It really helps me out. Now back to the story. My memory is a bit hazy after that. I remember huddling in the corner of the closet while Mrs. Mills kept an eye on the door. I also remember thinking how ironic it was that we were hiding in the closet right next to our classroom, practically inches away from the danger, but not being able to leave for fear of our lives. An hour and a half passed. We were finally told to come out of the closet. Some of my classmates ran out and threw up on the floor. Mrs. Mills stopped them. She led us out of the classroom and into the hall. We stayed close together, our eyes darting around, looking for the threat that we all knew was present, but none of us could see. We were then corralled into the gym. From there, we were loaded onto buses and driven to a nearby church. When I got home, I found my mom sitting on the porch swing. Her face was pale, and she had her phone pressed to her ear. I wanted to tell her what had happened, but I was shocked and scared. All that came out was a sob. She hung up the phone and pulled me into the tightest hug ever. "I thought something had happened to you," she whispered. "I was so scared." I managed to tell her about the lockdown, and she drove me back to school to pick up my things. I was so relieved to get away from all those people and the feeling that someone was watching me. After I got home, I was able to text my friends. They all had the same thing to say. "Are you okay? What happened?" None of us really knew what had happened. The police hadn't released any information, and most of the students had gone home. I went to my room and put on my favorite album by 3 Days Grace. I hoped the music would calm me down, but instead, it made me feel angrier. Each song only reminded me of how close I had come to death. I could still hear the screams of the other students in my ears. I wished I could forget that day forever. My mom texted me, "Did you hear anything?" I responded, "Is it bad?" She replied, "It's much worse than a fight." I felt sick to my stomach. What could be worse than a fight? I got up the courage to ask her what it was, and she said that she would call me. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited. Around 4:30, my mom called me. She sounded upset. "There are multiple cars lined up outside the school," she said, "and the news is reporting that there's been an incident. They aren't saying what, but apparently it's serious. Stay inside and lock the doors." Then she told me what she had learned from one of my classmates. Apparently, earlier that morning, 2 kids had gotten into a fight in the rotunda. One of them pulled out a knife and stabbed the other. He stabbed him right in front of the entire school. I was horrified. I had been in that rotunda hundreds of times. Just the thought of someone dying there made me feel weak. Then the worst part came. The boy who had been stabbed had died. My mom could barely get the words out. "He's dead. Someone stabbed him in the heart." I immediately burst into tears. It hurt to breathe. I felt like my chest was being ripped apart. The pain radiated throughout my body. I didn't know the kid who had been stabbed, but hearing about his death set everything that had happened into perspective. I spent the rest of the day crying and hugging my mom. She didn't make me go back to school the next day. I was too distraught to go anyway. I couldn't focus on my classes when all I could think about was the stabbing. I listened to sad music and stared at the walls. I wished I could forget what I had seen and heard. The following week, more details were released to the public. I found out that 2 students had been taken to the hospital, both injured but alive. A teacher had also been slashed. 3 people total had been hurt. The 16-year-old who had stabbed the other kid was arrested. He was charged with voluntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, and possession of a weapon on school property. 2 more students, a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, were also charged. They were accused of assault and disorderly conduct. A few weeks after the stabbing, a video of it surfaced online. I didn't watch the whole thing, but my mom told me about it. The person filming was running, so the footage was shaky. You could hear screams in the background. My mom believes that the incident was gang-related, which terrifies me. What if someone wants revenge? What if they want to hurt someone else? What if they want to hurt me? I don't know. I've never been the same since that day. It would bring the whole school together. I'm on the outskirts of Philadelphia. My son is in 7th grade, and my stepdaughter is in 8th grade. My best friend, Joanne, has a daughter named Alexis, who's 14. Her ex-husband, Mark, murdered Joanne in 2016, along with 2 other women. Mark was finally convicted for all 6 murders, and is currently serving 3 life sentences with no parole. Mark is also Alexis's biological father. He only had visitation every other weekend. He wasn't allowed to pick her up or drop her off. That always fell to a family member or a friend. I'm a middle school teacher at the same school that my kids go to. My son is 1 grade below me, and Alexis is 1 grade above me. We got through last year without any incidents, so this year we're happy to be back in school. On March 30th, 2020, schools were just starting to shut down due to COVID. This was before the vaccine and when everyone was getting scared. Our school was still open, though, because it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's actually one of the reasons why we chose to send our kids there. Around noon, I got an automated call saying someone was at the main office to pick up Alexis. Now, I'm immediately alarmed for several reasons. First, Alexis has no doctor's appointments or anything like that today. Second, I know all of her family members, and none of them live close enough to come and get her. And third, the automated call said her biological father was here to pick her up. Now, that isn't even possible. We never gave the school his name or even a phone number to contact him. Whenever anyone picks her up, Joanne or one of us would get her, and we'd bring her to him at the end of the visit. I've never given the school Mark's phone number, let alone his name, so I called Alexis's teacher right away. She had no idea what was going on, and neither did anyone else in the school. I told the teacher to keep Alexis in class and send her to my room when she gets a chance. Then I walked down to the main office. When I got there, a secretary looked terrified and was sitting behind a stack of desks. I asked her what was going on, and she told me that she didn't know. But when she answered the phone and heard what was happening, she moved the desks to block her office, and she was waiting for someone from security to come and help her. I told her I was a teacher and that I needed to get to my students. I thanked her, and I ran to my classroom. When I got to my classroom, I pushed the desks against the door, and I started yelling for the students to come to the corner of the room. I turned off the lights, and I could hear screaming coming from outside. I'm frantically trying to get my students into a safe space when I hear a lockdown siren go off. I tell them to stay quiet, and I tell them I need them to listen to me very carefully. I don't know what's going on yet, but I know it has something to do with Alexis. One of my students starts freaking out and says, "My dad's gonna die." I tried to calm him down, and I told him that we were gonna be okay. The lockdown continued for about 46 minutes. I talked to my students, and I made sure they knew how important it was to listen to their teachers and to follow instructions. I also told them I was worried about one of my students, and I'd be back as soon as I could. I told them to stay in the corner until someone came to get them, and I ran out into the hall. As I ran down the hallway, I could see police officers running around. I asked one of them what was going on, and he told me to run to the office. I asked him if Alexis was okay, and he said he didn't know. So I ran to the main office. When I got there were several police officers huddled around the secretary's desk. I asked if Alexis was okay, and one of the officers said, "Ma'am, are you Alexis's mother?" I responded, "No, I'm her stepmom, and I'm her teacher." He looked over at one of the other officers and he said, "Okay, so you're her teacher. Do you know where her classroom is?" I said, "Yes, but I think you need to come with me." He nodded, and we headed to my classroom. On the way over, he explained that there had been a prison bus that crashed earlier that morning. 10 prisoners died, and 2 of the guards were knocked out. Also, 20 inmates escaped, and they believed that Alexis's biological father was one of them. I instantly panicked. That was why Mark was at the school. He was looking for Alexis. He stopped outside my classroom and asked me to open the door while he peeked inside. I opened the door, and he closed it behind me. He asked me, "Are your students okay?" I said, "Yes, they're fine. What about Alexis?" He told me that they hadn't found her yet, and that they wanted to take me to my car to search it. I agreed, and I stepped outside with him. At that point, another officer approached us, and he said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to ask this of you, but we need you to step out of the car and raise your hands." I instantly panicked. Did they think I had kidnapped my own stepdaughter? I stepped out of the car with my hands raised, and then they patted me down and searched the car. They even asked me if I minded if they brought the dog. I said, "Of course not." They searched the entire car, and they even lifted up the seats. But when they couldn't find anything, they apologized and they let me go. I walked back to the school with them, and they asked me if I noticed anyone suspicious in the area. I told them that I saw a man matching Mark's description walking by the school, but I thought he was just lost or something. I didn't think much of it at the time. After they left, I went back into the school, and I sat down next to the secretaries. We were waiting for word from the police and for the all-clear to end the lockdown. Finally, a police officer came into the office and he said, "Ma'am, are you the teacher?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Good. You stay here and wait for us." He then left and went back out into the hallway. I looked over at the secretary, and she was crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "They just told me over the radio that they found Alexis in my office. She's okay, but she's gone. They took her to be questioned." I felt a huge weight lift off of my chest, and I thanked God that she was okay. The police officers came back into the office and they said, "Ma'am, can you stand up?" I stood up and they handcuffed me. I instantly panicked and I started to cry. I thought, "Oh my God, they think I did something to Alexis. Why are they arresting me?" One of the officers looked at me and said, "Ma'am, I know this probably seems scary, but we just need to ask you a few questions." I nodded, and I followed them out of the building. They took me to a separate building where there were several police cars. They brought me into a small conference room, and they offered me water and they asked me to sit down. Once I was seated, they asked me several questions about what I did that day and what I remember seeing. I told them everything. Finally, they asked me why I barricaded my classroom doors and why I moved my desks. I told them about the automated phone call and how I had sent Alexis to the principal's office. At that point, they all left the room and they whispered amongst themselves. When they came back, they apologized, and they said that I did exactly what I was supposed to do and that I saved my students. I was so confused. Saved my students. How did I save my students? Well, according to the police, when Mark entered the school, he was armed and dangerous. He was looking for Alexis. He had somehow gotten past the front office, and he was heading towards her classroom. He didn't have a key, but he kicked open one of the classroom doors, and he was able to slip in between the door and the frame. He had killed 2 students, and he had injured several others when I sounded the alarm. He dropped his gun, and he started running down the hall. The police believe he was planning to use hostages to escape the school, and then he would have taken off on foot. They found his gun near the classroom, and they found his fingerprints all over the door. The police also found his shoes outside the school, and they matched his DNA. I learned that the 2 guards that were knocked out during the prison break were sitting right outside the school in their car. They weren't even there to guard the prisoners. They were just sitting there eating donuts. Those 2 guards ended up being fired, and both of them faced several charges, including allowing prisoners to escape. The police also learned that Mark had been targeting this school for weeks. He had called the school multiple times asking for Alexis, but they hung up on him. The most recent call was just 2 days before the lockdown. He called and asked for her by name, and he asked to speak to her specifically. When he was denied, he threatened the secretary, and that's when they decided to end the lockdown early. If it weren't for me listening to my gut and checking on Alexis, then who knows what would have happened. I know that Mark would have never hesitated to kill me, my husband, my son, or Alexis. But for some reason, he didn't want to hurt students. That's why he kicked in a classroom door and tried to sneak in. He just wanted Alexis. I honestly believe that he would have killed everyone in that room if I hadn't set off the alarm. To this day, I have no idea what Mark was planning to do with the students, but I'll never know now. I don't think I'll ever stop wondering what would have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut and checked on Alexis that day. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.